Pitbull. It's a fucking Pitbull song. Welcome to Psychocinematic, a podcast where we analyse depictions of mental illness and disability in popular films and TV. I'm your host, Stephanie Fornasia. If you love our podcast and want to give us some support, make sure you're following Psychocinematic Podcast on Instagram, TikTok and Twitter. And check out our website, psychocinematicpodcast.com, for access to special bonus content, episodes, early access, stickers, and contribute to our regular fundraisers. Join our Patreon. Starting from $3.50 a month, you can be the coolest Psychocinematic listener there is. I would like to start today's recording by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that I am sitting on today, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging who look after this land. And remind everybody that I am sitting on stolen land. All eyes on Rafah, free Palestine. My dear readers! And hello everyone, I'm here with an episode for you a little earlier than I expected, and it's just me today, so let's see if we can make it through a full-length episode with just me talking at myself. But you know what, it's been a shit of a year for me, it's been a shit of a year for most people. I don't know anyone in my life who isn't having a shitty year, and that's pretty shit. Enough of the slandering of the year, but what I thought was a good little distraction from the shitness was to focus on a movie or TV show that is just purely escapism content, but with a lot of talking points that fall in line with the psychocinematic focus, and that is Bridgerton. Bridgerton Season 3. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you must be hiding under a rock or you're a child, in which case, listen to a different podcast. I have to admit that I have guilty pleasures, and most people do, and Bridgerton is one of them. Well, when I say guilty pleasure, I don't feel guilty about it at all. I am very, very happy to express my love for a trashy TV show or movie, and that is one of them. So first of all, why Bridgerton? Why are people drawn to Bridgerton so much? What is it about this show that every season that comes out is automatically in the top 5 or the number 1 of Netflix shows? I feel like, firstly, it's a bit of a sensory smorgasbord in a sense. That is probably the wankiest thing I've ever said. But there are so many elements of the show that's just visually appealing, audibly appealing, the language in the show, the characters, mostly the costumes, let's be honest. I love watching the costumes each episode, and I guess one of the sort of novelty factors of Bridgerton when it came out was that it turned pop songs, rock songs, modern day songs into Regency classical pieces and dance numbers, which at first was like, ooh, this is kind of cool, I guess. And then I think the novelty wore off and it was a little bit cringe. But I have to admit, I did enjoy hearing the initial songs, indie songs as well. For example, hearing Dancing on My Own by Robin in a string quartet was pretty cool. But it doesn't always land. But look, props for giving it something a bit different. I think when it comes to the storyline, essentially we love gossip. I'm someone who cannot help but be drawn to gossip, and sometimes that can be a problem. But it's much easier and safer to enjoy fake gossip, or gossip about somebody you've never met and never will meet, which is why podcasts such as Normal Gossip are so enjoyed and beloved. If you haven't listened to Normal Gossip, please do so. And then there was the show, which I think this is kind of the 2020s version of Gossip Girl, which was great because we could enjoy the gossip of people who are truly terrible. So, you know, we could enjoy watching the toxic mind games, manipulation, and first world problems of truly entitled, rich, awful people, and also enjoy their fashion as well. Keeping in mind that the poorest person in Gossip Girl was the most fucked up of them all. Sorry about that, spoiler alert. But essentially, it's pure escapism. We get our sort of dopamine rush of that gossip when it is all about relationships and scandals, and also, I guess, that secret hidden mystery of what is going on. What is the backstory of this character? Why will they not commit? Why will they not pick a wife? Why will they not have children? What's going on? And it's all fake, and it's all dramatic and sort of fantastical, because, you know, the world of Bridgerton doesn't exist, will never exist, has never existed. And I say that mainly because it's a society which is based in a real place, London, but that race is not an issue. Maybe it has been an issue in the past, but history has been rewritten so that the Queen of England is a black woman, and people can have very esteemed hierarchical titles from a range of different cultures and backgrounds. And that is sadly not the case. But I think it is something that is refreshing about the genre. I myself am not a person of color. I'm a white cis woman. I'm very privileged, and I'm checking that. But I'm assuming, and from what I've read, I guess it's quite reclaiming to see people of color being able to be represented in those Regency pieces, in positions of power, in positions of wealth and high society. So it's nice to see that. I wish we saw more of that. Having said that, there are definitely flaws to Bridgerton. Is it feminist? No. Is it queer? Only coded mostly, apart from in Queen Charlotte. And do we need to marry? You know, the coming out debutantes and the need for women to secure a partner. Obviously, that is a big part of the storyline between some of the main protagonists, particularly in this season. But I just also hate it. So, you know, it is quite shit that women have to marry in order to get away from their toxic family in the land of Bridgerton, as is the case for Penelope. And I guess, you know, that's where that comes from in terms of Regency in the past. But, you know, there's so much plays with reality here. Wouldn't it be nice if that, I don't know, maybe we could work with that a little bit more. But, you know, at the same time, the plot of the show is who's going to marry who and how well are they going to marry and who's going to be paired with who. And it's a very simple, escapist way after a long day to process your very long day. I don't think it's a coincidence that in the world we live in now, where there is just constant trauma and death and murder and displacement and destruction of a range of communities across the world. Of course, I'm referring to Palestine and Gaza, but also Sudan and Congo, of course the war in Ukraine, and I'm sure there's so many others that I have neglected to mention. The global financial crisis, a lot of us, you know, our Netflix subscription is our luxury, and that's all we really have. I know for me, particularly being a single person with a single income, living in an apartment alone apart from my son, I have had to tighten those purse strings, and it's not fun. So being able to escape into the world of Bridgerton, it feels comforting. It feels like a place of refuge where, imagine if your biggest problem was what kind of flowers will be at the ball tonight, and oh, I don't want to have to talk to that gentleman who, you know, is very rich but very ugly. I want to marry for love instead of convenience. Like, oh. But to have those conundrums when you're just making sure you're eating and all of those things. So let's have a brief history of the seasons and the representations that we saw. I guess we had the first season of Bridgerton where the Duke and Daphne came together. That was the first Bridgerton series where we were trying to figure out what kind of series this was. I think what was interesting about Bridgerton, because I watched it when Casper was like 1, he was pretty young, and I'd start watching it with him in the room and be like, yep, no, this is fine. And then as it got a little bit more heated, a little bit more horny, I don't think I can watch this with my son in the room anymore. So it, kind of was a little bit of a surprise. Oh, this is kind of porn. I'll watch this later. And I think that was kind of a bit cheeky and fun about Bridgerton. I think it's pretty well agreed that we all found the Duke extremely attractive. I'm a straight woman, so I don't particularly find Daphne attractive, and I'm not sure if you would call her like hot or sexy, but the scenes were very sexy, and we very much reveled in that. And that was probably just around, like, we were still in the midst of lockdown, so I think, it was kind of like Tiger King. Everyone was like, oh, have you seen Bridgerton? So it was a really good start for the series. But I guess the plot line for the Duke was that, I haven't rewatched the first season, so I'm just going this by memory. The Duke's name being Simon, played by Regé-Jean Page, very attractive man. Unfortunately, has not come back since season 1. They fall in love with one another and marry, but with the Duke having told Daphne that he can't have children. And because, as we also see in the season, the understanding of sex is very limited at this time, even though they can get very hot and heavy with sex, Daphne doesn't realize that he actually can have children, and he's just choosing not to. But once she does discover this, it obviously creates tension. But what we find out is it seems like he doesn't want to pass on the Hastings name due to a really fucked up father who is quite cruel, quite abusive to him, and that his father really only wanted an heir to continue the family name. So Simon's response to the cruelty of his father, the fact that his mother died in childbirth, Simon decides he doesn't want to continue the Hastings family, and that's why he's said that he can't have children. Obviously things end well as a child is conceived and born. Because this is a mental health podcast and disability podcast, if we're looking at mental health issues, it is very clear that the Duke has some significant complex PTSD, which in true Bridgerton fashion is managed much quicker than you would ordinarily manage if this was a real life situation, in that Simon falls in love, talks it through, and is cured of his PTSD. But it also kind of, I guess, explains his aloofness and his treatment of Daphne initially. He obviously has closed himself off to relationships and connections, but that is changed when he finds someone who is willing to love him for who he is. Aww. Conditional love is broken with unconditional love. Then we move on to season 2, which is the story of Anthony, the Viscount, and Kate Sharma falling in love. And just like in the first season, there is, of course, barriers to them expressing their love and being in love. And it comes from 2 levels of trauma. So the backstory with Kate being that her father married again to Lady Mary, who treated Kate as if she was her own, and then her father died. Kate is quite a mother figure to her half-sister Edwina. However, she is not considered part of the family, so should she wed, there would be no dowry, I think. Whereas her sister Edwina is entitled to a dowry if she marries, because she is related by blood to the Sheffields, which is the grandparents. Very confusing. I'm not even sure if I'm talking about the right people, but that is the sort of backstory. Kate doesn't think she's entitled to love because her focus is really just on giving her sister what she wants and what the family needs. And then, of course, Anthony, we very viscerally see in many ways how he watched his father die tragically of anaphylaxis after being stung by a bee and felt obviously the weight of the responsibility of that happening and not being able to stop it, as well as then being sort of responsible for the household because his mother, Violet, was pregnant with his younger sister and was even asked at a point whether to keep the mother or the baby alive due to the difficulty of the birth, the breech birth. So him being thrust into the role of Viscount and of patriarch of the family and all the pressure that involves was obvious. And also that trauma response of that very hot scene where him and Kate get close for the same time because Kate's been stung by a bee. But you kind of see the panic. It's a well-acted scene, and I could watch it over and over again because it's panic, but it also invokes vulnerability and intimacy between them. So I guess, they're kind of trauma bonded in a way because they see themselves very similarly as reluctant heads of the family and having to put everybody's needs above theirs, despite looking gorgeous. So we have that kind of eldest child, parentification, trauma, complex trauma, shame and guilt, mental health processes going on. Then we have Queen Charlotte, a Bridgerton story, which I am actually hoping I get to do a full episode on because it is very, very clearly a mental illness story, a disability story as well, a psychosocial disability story. Bingo. Where we are introduced to Queen Charlotte as a young girl who is betrothed to King George. And King George, as we know as Mad King George. So essentially, Charlotte and George get to know each other quite well, fall in love with each other, but they do then discover that there is a secret about King George and there's some interesting behaviour and the decline of his well-being that Charlotte experiences. And then we discover that George is quote-unquote mad, and the palace very much tries to hide that from the rest of the world. We also see King George try to access a range of really horrible, not helpful treatments to try and cure himself, and she intervenes with this. It's pretty brutal, and, it's not the best depiction of a mental illness. It's probably, a look at what it would have been like to have a mental illness like that in Regency era, in Victorian times. And it is based somewhat in history of King George III being historically known for having some psychological issues. What they actually are, I think, is debatable. The way they sort of portray King George's illness in Bridgerton, I think it's supposed to be like some sort of schizoid disorder, schizophrenia, psychosis. However, there are definitely some inaccuracies of how that would be portrayed based on what we see in the show. So yeah, I don't think we know exactly what it was, but what I have got here is a Screen Rant article, which, is probably not the most empirical article that I could refer to, but just for a bit of an overview, according to historical accounts of King George III in IRL, his illness included symptoms like convulsions, frothing at the mouth, rambling incoherently, bouts of depression, and later in life the loss of hearing, vision, memory, and ability to walk. And then after the death of his daughter, Princess Amelia, George sank into a deep depression, which he never recovered from. There was a prevailing theory that King George III had porphyria, which is a rare liver disorder, and he was exposed to arsenic, which contributed to the worsening of the symptoms. But there has been conflicting theories in recent years, even though there's lots of documentation about the porphyria. So apparently in the last decade or so, historians have posited that King George III instead had a combination of bipolar disorder, chronic mania is a symptom of bipolar disorder, and dementia. And that would kind of probably explain his deterioration in his later years. And apparently Dr. Peter Gerard of St. George's, University of London, said the porphyria theory is completely dead in the water. This was a psychiatric illness. I guess we don't know, do we? Back in the early 1800s, there wasn't any understanding of psychiatric illness, but yeah, It's very interesting. And I think Queen Charlotte, I'm not sure how well it did compared to the other series, but, it's more of a spin-off. I think what intrigued people was, the parallel between this person portrayed in Bridgerton and the real King George. But yeah, I think that there's definitely a podcast episode around that if I can get around to it. And if by the time I do, Bridgerton is still relevant. I'm sure it will be. Bridgerton Season 3. Tagline being, even a wallflower can bloom. And what we love about this season already, no matter what happens in the season, even if you don't care about Bridgerton or like Bridgerton, you have to admit that it is fucking refreshing to have the main character of a series that is deeply popular, bit trashy, very beautifully portrayed, be a person who is plus size. It made me very excited. It's made everybody very excited. And not only is she plus size, she's not a little bit plus size, she's genuinely plus size. She's fucking hot. She has autonomy and agency in this season. She's the main fucking character. She is spoiler alert, she's Lady Whistledown. And she's Nicola Coughlan, who is a fucking goddess. I fucking love her. Obviously, she's the talk of the town at the moment, but if you haven't seen anything else she's in, definitely watch Derry Girls. Derry Girls is worth watching from beginning to end because you kind of get into the headspace of it. Like, it's very fast-paced. Also watch Big Mood, which is probably a podcast episode's worth as well. Big Mood portrays someone with bipolar disorder in a very honest, vulnerable way. And she does it so brilliantly. I feel like she's in other things. But anyway, definitely watch those two things. She's been around for a while and she's just so fantastic. Such a great actress and just perfect in this role. And we see her bloom. And even if you just watch this series just for Nicola, it's worth it. It's worth it. So let's talk about what happens in this season. So I'm going to talk about the first 4 episodes probably quite briefly, but more focus on what I want to talk about because it's just me here. But I guess to catch us up to what we see in the first 4 episodes, essentially there's been some stuff that went down last season in terms of the Featheringtons, which is Penelope's family. They were in quite a bit of debt because Lord Featherington fucked up their finances. I'm not really sure. I don't pay as much attention to the financy stuff. I'm sure none of us do. We just want to get to the hot parts. Lady Featherington's cousin Jack starts scamming everybody to try and get them back into the green. But then Lady Featherington scams him back and sends him off with a promise to secure some money if they can provide an heir. So she marries off Penelope's older sisters to others. Older sisters, I think. To these dudes who they kind of treat like dogs. Like, do what I want. It's kind of refreshing. And Penelope is getting a little bit jack of all of this. And decides that she needs to find herself a husband so she can get away from her family. And you can see, like, I kind of like, in some way, the character of Penelope's mother. I'm forgetting her name. What's her name? Portia Featherington. Apologies there. I kind of like Portia as a character because she's a bit sassy and, a bit manipulative, a bit conniving. She reminds me of my mum a little bit, but, in a way that I kind of respect that from her. And she's got good lines, but she's awful to Penelope. Just truly terrible. I guess how you love a mum, but she's also terrible to you. Understandably, Penelope's like, I've got to get out of here. The only way I can do that is to marry someone. And so that's her plan for this season. Having said that, as we all know, she is Lady Whistledown. And what happened last episode was that Eloise discovered she was Lady Whistledown, or more put 2 and 2 together because of the fact that she, in the last season, went on a bit of a journey to try and uncover who Lady Whistledown was, and then fell in love, but I would say it's like, because as we all hope, and pray. Eloise is gay. She ends up becoming close to a commoner from the rough parts of London, Theo. I can't remember exactly what happened, but like Whistledown exposes that. So Whistledown throws Eloise under the bus so as to throw them off the scent, because Eloise is accused of being Lady Whistledown by the Queen, which puts Penelope in an awful position where she doesn't want Eloise to end up with this accusation, but in order to stop this, she needs to write something horrible about her. So she was kind of between a rock and a hard place. And once that was kind of uncovered, Eloise figured out, finally, that Penelope was Lady Whistledown. And they have not been friends ever since then. So, yeah, there's been a bit of a hiatus of Lady Whistledown's writing. And then also to add plot development, Colin has grown, and Colin and Penelope have been friends for some time, and it's very clear Penelope has mad feelings of love for Colin, crushing hard on Colin. And Colin has returned again from overseas, a bit of a brogue. He's looking a bit more trim around the face. He's sort of blossomed a little bit himself. And I'm surprised. At first, I was like, I don't find Colin that attractive. But by the end of the season, by the end of that carriage scene, yeah, I could go for Colin. He's all right. I'm all right with that. So, yeah, I think Bridgerton does a really good job of making people attractive in many ways, in most ways. So, yes, Colin. Colin enters the picture, and Penelope ends up asking Colin for some support, some help, and how to get a husband. And Colin offers to give her some assistance with that. I'm not really sure what Colin's qualifications are, or what his whole, like, why. I guess he's helping out a friend and wanted to show her that he cared about her. But, you know, why ask Colin? Obviously, don't ask your mum. Don't ask your sisters. But why Colin? Why not? Like, Daphne helped Anthony a lot, and Penelope and Kate Sharma, I think, got along quite well. Why not talk to them about it? Although Kate's probably busy having sex with her husband. Anyway, that is where we're at this season. That is the plot. And of course, just like with Daphne and the Duke and the pretending to be in love, but then they were in love, it's another one of those very popular, you know, Pygmalion type plot lines where let's give you a glow up. This is what'll help. I'll teach you how to fall in love with someone. And then, oh my God, we're falling in love. How many rom-coms has this happened? Like most. Is some variation of that theme. So, but you know, we love it. We live for it. Like, yes, it's predictable and we know what's going to happen, but that is safe right now. That feels safe. Predictability is safe. So just watching it blossom is just like, I know where this is going and I'm here for it. We also have a few other plot lines going on, including a few things I want to touch on. Firstly, Eloise is gay. This is my query. Like, Eloise is so different from everybody else in Bridgerton, in her family. She's not interested in finding a lover. She doesn't like societal expectations. She almost joins a union last season. She's a feminist. That doesn't make someone gay. But she clearly doesn't seem to have an interest in men or boys, apart from Theo, and I feel like that was maybe just that he was in the same wavelength as her, because I think she, and I'm not the only one, it's everywhere. Her and Cressida stuff, I feel like there's a vibe there. Don't you think there's a vibe there? And the way she's so, you know, I feel like Penelope was kind of her gal that, you know, she felt safe and comfortable with. And, you know, if Penelope wanted to make things more, I think she'd be totally cool with it. Penelope's not gay though. So, you know, I hope that she doesn't find someone. I hope that she is the lesbian of the season, and I really want that to be a storyline. But is it a cop-out if Eloise ends up dating, or at least being in love with a woman? Or should we want her to be an asexual queen? Or should we want her to be just a feminist icon who's just like, you know, the Clementine Ford of Bridgerton, who's just like, let's not fucking marry men? Just be that icon who's against the structure of society and those expectations on women. Maybe that's all she should be, and to make her gay would be a cop-out. What do you think? Like, if there's anyone who has gender studies behind them or some sociology experience, can, give me some vibes. What do you think? Because I've always thought that Benedict was going to come out as gay, because he was always like, who's in that sort of arty world, which was kind of paid for him, but he felt like he belonged there. And he was painting naked bodies, but, he didn't seem to like find love within that. And he's sort of a floater and he doesn't really know what he's doing. And then, I was hoping he would have the gay storyline, but it seems that he finds love in what's like a divorcee who, sort of seems to be coded as an older woman, but she's probably not much older than him. She just kind of dresses a little bit more maturely and has been married before, which I like. I love that storyline. I like it. But really thought he was going to be gay. But the only gay storyline we've had so far is Brimsley in Queen Charlotte, which was a lovely storyline, really heartbreaking. And I feel like they could only introduce the gay character in Queen Charlotte because it wasn't Bridgerton main. It was prequel spin-off Bridgerton. So maybe they're just testing the waters and they don't want to go in too deep. But like, we will be so here for it. Please. Like, you don't even have to show them having sex. That will be enough to see them, close to each other, like we see in all those preemptive scenes with Anthony and Kate Charmer. Maybe we'll see more in the next 4 episodes. And then we potentially have some disability representation in this latest season. So firstly, I do need to just mention briefly that there is a character in Bridgerton who's in a wheelchair and who seems to have a really good banter with Penelope. I was like, ooh, there's a hot guy in a wheelchair. Could this be something? Could she be the one that she's kind of, tossing up between? And then he gets wheeled away. And it's like, oh. I was like, oh, here we go. Here we go. We get some disability representation, some good disability representation. There's some vibes. Oh, no, he's being wheeled away by somebody else. Fuck. So autonomy, no. And of course, it would be of the time. We're not necessarily going to see an inclusive society in Bridgerton. It clearly isn't. There's a lot of staircases, but it was a bit disappointing. And then we have some neurodivergence. So many people have highlighted the fact that Francesca is so deeply coded as autistic in how she completely engages with the world. There are so many signs that she's likely autistic. I mean, firstly, she's very introverted, shy, doesn't want to really come out, isn't that interested in the whole fancifulness of it. Does want to get married, but what she's after isn't necessarily what her mum and her sisters are after. She is looking for something quite different. And then we see her hyperfocus, her special interest being the pianola or the piano. And that is very much what takes up her time. So she's very, very heavily invested in that interest, to the point that when they're walking down the street and she hears, well, I guess music as a whole, when they're walking down the street and she hears the violin playing some music, that's all she can focus on. And they're trying to have a conversation and she's just pointing out all the reasons why the arrangement is all wrong in the violin. So she's very much attuned to that sensory experience of music to a point that it's above all else. And she's very, very perceptive. So quite a big skill of hers is music. She meets Lord Kilmartin, another very attractive man. And, all the attractive... See, what I think I love about Bridgerton is the attractive characters also have attractive personalities, not just looks. Whereas, the attractive other sort of characters that are obviously they're good looking, that aren't, very nice. Yeah, I just don't find myself attracted to them. And maybe that's just me because I'm a bit of a demisexual. It's not all about looks for me. There has to be personality there too. I'm sure I'm not the only one. But yes, she meets John Kilmartin and she's drawn to him much more so than everyone else. And he is clearly unique in himself. And they sit in silence. They do not wish to speak. And they are both quite comfortable in that silence. She looks at him, she looks away. He looks at her, he looks away. They are communicating. They are deeply communicating, but they are not using words. And so much goes on in those few moments where they're sitting there in silence together. And everyone's like, what the fuck? What is going on? But between them, it all makes sense. And I think it's a very obvious sign that how Francesca and Kilmartin's brains work are very in tune with each other and very different from the common folk of Bridgerton. And I guess on top of that, the previous conversation that I mentioned about the arrangement of the violin being just horrible to her, and she conveys that to John Kilmartin and, explains why it's horrible. And he immediately leaves. So social cues and not so much social cues, but social normities aren't really followed. He just leaves, Irish exits, and then writes up an arrangement for her that she would prefer. And he gives it to her at the ball and she just leaves. Just like she asks for permission first because she's been trained to mask. But she does leave the ball and goes to play it. It's their communication. Their communication is through music and silence. So noise and silence. That's how they connect. And it's beautiful. I love it. Obviously, I can't see anything but coding happening rather than canonizing the autism experience in Bridgerton. But I do love seeing a neurodivergent person find another neurodivergent person. I'm sure there'll be bumps along the road, but yeah, it's nice to see that storyline, and it's nice to see that it's being supported and embraced in the storyline. Obviously, I think, as I just mentioned before, you can see how Francesca's probably learned to mask more than John Kilmartin has, even though, he does have a lot of the social niceties in place. He's also willing to just walk away and leave when he just, has that need to, whereas it's more necessary for Francesca to sort of follow those norms of society, especially living in a family like the Bridgertons and being one of the younger children, whereas obviously Lord Kilmartin is, probably higher on the hierarchy in his family. So interesting. I did like that. But I also wondered, are there other characters in this season that could be considered neurodivergent? Particularly Lord Debling. Lord Debling. He comes across as, again, someone who's very focused on his interests above all else. He also has the means and the privilege to explore those interests beyond anything else. He goes on expeditions. He's a person who's focused and obsessed with nature, and that's all that occupies his time. So much so that he doesn't really care to marry for love. He could maybe be someone who is asexual or aromantic. He really just wants to continue with his life, with his adventures. All the conversation he has that brings him joy is around nature. That's all he wants to talk about. He's very polite and respectable, but he's very honest and he's very open to say that I'm not here for love. I just want to settle down so you can focus on the home and I'll carry on with my business and what I want to do. So, I quite liked that was explored in a respectful way. I think he's a good person and he just tells you what he wants. And of the time that they were in, that was expected, that a man would marry and a woman would not really have much say in what life would look like. But, he gave Penelope an out and he was honest with her, like, this is what I'm looking for in a partner. And she said, yeah, okay. And then he was like, you seem pretty into that Colin guy. And she's like, no. He's like, yeah. So that was the scene. I just completely replicated the scene. So yeah, I think there's a case that could be sad for Lord Debling being a bit neurodivergent. And having said that, you could probably make a case that Penelope could be a little bit neurodivergent as well. When I say a little bit neurodivergent, you're either neurodivergent or you're not, but I'm just I'm just interpreting a fictional character. There's a lot of things you could extrapolate from a character. So yeah, this is just where my mind goes. So that's why I'm not saying she's definitely this or definitely that. But I do think that Penelope isn't like her sisters. She's not like a lot of the people at Bridgerton. A lot of that probably comes from that she doesn't see herself as attractive. But having said that, like, yes, Penelope's a plus-size girl. At the time, in Regency time, that was seen as more attractive. Having curves was more embraced and seen as sexy than being thin and not having curves. So I would find it interesting if we were to look back. There's so many problems with looking back and how it would have been in real life, but I do think that Penelope would have been seen as a pretty attractive, desirable woman in the early 1800s and Regency time. So yeah, I think that you could probably make a case that Penelope being a bit different isn't just because of her looks or at all because of her looks. Maybe about how she's treated by her mum, but her interests are very focused on writing and reading. She's very introspective, and that's why she's drawn to focusing on the world around her and writing those things down. She's a listener. She fades into the background. She notices the details. She picks up on what everyone's saying. She's very attuned to the world around her, and that is what she focuses her time doing. So, that reads neurodivergent to me, in that focus inwards, the tendency not to sort of fit in and to process things a little bit more differently than everybody else, and for their interests to be a bit more restricted in that focus. So, Penelope, and she expresses that she's very unlike her sisters. She doesn't feel the same as everybody else. She finds a lot of things more frustrating and irritating than other people. And having said that, do we think that Eloise could potentially have some neurodivergence in her? She sees things differently. Maybe some ADHD even. Like, her mind is she needs a lot of stimulation and focus. She finds all of this stuff around looking pretty and getting a husband dull and boring. She needs entertainment. She wants to be doing more important things. She wants to focus in on more important things that she considers more important. She can also be slightly impulsive, the way she keeps going to the rough side of the tracks to find Theo, and not quite so considered about how that puts her in a vulnerable position. She's been accused of saying too much and being a little bit too brash and not fitting in with society's norms quite so much. She's also got a very funny sense of humor, and she's the type of woman that if she had the means, she could start a revolution. Very intelligent. These are my thoughts. What do you think? Please let me know. I could be completely overreading some things, but isn't that what I do every day? So I think I've pretty much touched on most of the plot of the first 4 episodes. There's some stuff there that's a little bit more boring, but essentially we've got Francesca finding some mutual attraction in Kilmartin. She's the diamond of the season, I believe. Excited to see where that goes. We've got Eloise, who's forged a new friendship with Cressida, who is seeing a little bit more vulnerability. She thinks she's unmarriable. She's always been a bit of a bitch, particularly to Penelope, but we're kind of seeing the other side of her as Eloise starts to form a friendship and appears to be enjoying that friendship. But, there are some mismatching there where, Eloise starts to talk about the things that she's interested in. And then Cressida's like, well, Debling's free now, bye. But also that scene was like, Eloise and Cressida, could there be something there? Also the fact that Eloise is the only friend that has ever called upon Cressida. And obviously Cressida doesn't have a lot of friends. Is that some subtext there, perhaps? Anyway, we'll see what happens there. But obviously Eloise and Penelope's friendship has been paused, and that will come to light soon as to where that goes, because the main plot point being the love story that has brought us all here is Penelope and Colin. So Penelope has always had feelings for Colin, and Colin was always seen her as a friend, and we famously remember him saying to some of his friends, I would never date Penelope. And obviously Penelope overhears that. But Colin does value Penelope as a friend, and they've had a long, enduring friendship. So he obviously offers to help her, and that continues until it becomes a little too much for them, because it's clear that without realizing it, Colin starts to develop feelings for Penelope. Part of this process is Penelope doing a major glow up, again, Pygmalion style, Strictly Ballroom style, all of those films. And, you know, it does suck that that's what needs to happen for her to find someone worth marrying, and also for Colin to pay attention. Doing her hair in a way that makes her look a little bit more sexy, and changing her color scheme to green rather than citrus. Little simple changes can make you look a little bit more alluring, but you know, it's about Penelope and who she is. So that's a bit disappointing, but damn, she looks good. It's very seductive and it works, clearly. So eventually it's very clear that Colin has fallen into feelings with Penelope. So he comes between her and Lord Debling, who look like they're going to be a match. And then we get to that iconic scene in the carriage, which I have seen a few times now. And I think what is so hilarious about that scene is that it starts with, you've probably got it in your head right now, a classical quartet version of Give You Everything Tonight, Give You Everything. Oh, yeah. Pitbull. It's a fucking Pitbull song. Like, when I think of sexy romantic scene, do I think of Pitbull? Of course I don't think of Pitbull. They start playing orchestra quartet version of Pitbull. Pitbull. And maybe that's the funny thing. Getting felt up in a carriage to Pitbull. It's giving getting felt up in an Uber to Pitbull being spewed out of the speakers of the Uber. I guess that is a translation to how that would happen in today's world. Except they haven't been drinking alcohol, they've been drinking lemonade. And this is indeed an expression of pent-up desire and love for each other. But somehow the Pitbull works. Somehow it works in the orchestra. And like, well done, Pitbull. I never wanted to hear or see from you ever again, but you've made it, man. You really have done a great job. Congratulations. So we get that scene. It's so sensual. It's so hot. And, you know, I feel weird talking about things that are hot. It's not something I do often on this podcast. You know, don't read too much into it as a now separated person, but it's just so well done. Like, you know, you can't deny, even if you hate this show and you think it's trash, it's such a good scene of that intimacy and that sexually charged energy, and they both play it so well. You can't help but feel a little turned on by it. There's been a lot of jokes about, you know, Colin's two fingers as he walks in and presents Penelope, his fiancée, afterwards. And I have to admit that, you know, the last line of, well, for God's sakes, Penelope, you going to marry me or not, is a little bit cringe. But it was a great climax, literally and figuratively, to this first half of season 3. And I got to say, I was here for it. I enjoyed it. And, you know, the tension pre that was quite cute and nice. You know, you imagine the butterflies, you imagine the rush of tingles. Yeah, it's quite sweet to watch. But next 4 episodes, there's obviously going to be some drama to work out, because we'll soon find out that they are engaged, betrothed. And she will want Penelope to tell Colin that she is Lady Whistledown. And Colin is not a fan of Lady Whistledown. And we want Penelope to succeed, but we also... she's the Dan Humphries of this series. And Dan Humphries was fucking creep. And he somehow got what he wanted at the end of it, which is fucking wild. But what do we want for Penelope? Like, obviously it's going to have to come out. But we also want more seasons of Bridgerton, right? Or maybe this will be the end. I doubt it. There'll be spin-offs. This is too much of a good thing for Netflix to just take away. So where are things going to go? I don't know. Maybe I just love Nicola Coughlan too much to separate her from the character. But I'm really rooting for Penelope, and I think she's genuinely, ultimately a good person. Good people do terrible things sometimes. And I think that ultimately she deserves happiness. So how will that look? Will she need to come clean and Colin be in on it? Or will she need to keep it to herself or pass the baton over to somebody else, which certainly has been the case with other unnamed secret characters? I'm thinking A from Pretty Little Liars. By the way, if you haven't already and you like Pretty Little Liars, you should definitely listen to the podcast Call an Adult, which is a Pretty Little Liars recap podcast, and it's fucking hilarious. Hosted by Ashley Appap and Haley, her co-host. I've forgotten her last name. I'm very sorry, Haley. Anyway, side quest. I just don't know where things are going to go. There are a few options. I can't imagine Penelope just outing herself as Lady Whistledown, because that would have to end the series. Unless a second Lady Whistledown comes out. It could be a bit like Desperate Housewives. How at first they were looking for who did a crime. I can't remember the series, and then there was a new crime and new people moved in. We had to work out what the backstory was there. You know, will there be another mystery to work out? I don't know. But I do hope that we get some more gay storylines, please. I hope that we explore more neurodivergence in Francesca, and maybe even we see some accommodations being made for a neurodivergence, like her and her new husband and maybe their kids, and how they see the world a bit differently and that's accepted and encouraged and accommodated for. Wouldn't that be lovely? And I want to see unnamed disabled suitor come back. I want him to have a storyline. Like, okay, you've dangled the carrot. Let's see more, please. I really want to see all of that. One thing I do not want anymore is club hits. Or do I? Club hits turned into orchestral quartet tunes. Do I? I don't know. I do want more sex. Yeah. I think we can all agree to that. More sexy scenes, please. I think we're going to get them. And you know what? I'd like there to be, maybe it's not Cressida, but I'd like there to be some more alignment with Eloise's criticisms of society. I think there needs to be more of that and playing that out a little bit more. Maybe she could befriend a spinster. See how that goes. Maybe an older gay couple who are just, aunts, just besties. I think that would be cool. But that would probably be for another season. Yeah. I think that's all I have to say. But what I would like to do next episode is get a guest. I know who I'd like to invite on, but I'm not sure if they will be keen. So we'll see. To talk through some of the things I brought up today in a little bit more detail from some more lived experience and professional experience. And, look at the next 4 episodes, what happens based on what we were predicting, and go into what we see in a little bit more detail. All being well, you should be listening to this before the next 4 episodes have been released. I'm going to give it my best. I have a flight to catch tomorrow, solo, kidless, so hopefully I can get that edited and out to you as soon as possible. And I'm really interested in your thoughts as well, so please send me your thoughts on our Instagram page. The Facebook group is still there, but I've kind of let it dwindle a little bit because there's really not much to report. But I really appreciate you all listening, and I hope that I've been engaging. I've really just been gas bagging at you. So I hope this has been an enjoyable listen. And I really hope to be back with some more regular episodes as soon as I can. I'm starting to get the creative juices flowing again, which means really just pointing them into a more strategic direction by scheduling in some episodes and planning ahead. So hopefully that happens and you'll hear from me with some more episodes, not just about Bridgerton, before the end of the year. But as usual, like, subscribe, all of the things. Tell your friends about this podcast. Oh my goodness, I need to also say that we reached 20,000 downloads yesterday, which is a surprise when I haven't been releasing episodes, so a wonderful surprise. And I hope we're all traveling as best we can while the world burns around us in the most horrific ways. And free Palestine. Like, no one wants to fuck to this song. Or even finger fuck to this song. Like, this doesn't make me feel sexy. I can't even handle this during, like, a workout. Ugh.